Good evening, good night, wherever you are. Once again, we are back. Love Bay family, thank you for being here at the Champions Table. We got a special episode for you. We got a special guest that's really going to share some really great things. Last time we were together, we talked about the birth of a nation and how Canada came together and how the Indigenous people have contributed to this country. But today we're going to talk about how we as a people, the African people of African descent, have contributed to this country. But before we get there, as you know, it's intentional conversations that we have with our audience, letting them know how things are going and also that we can hear from you. It's not just me talking, it's just not my guest talking, but it's also hearing from the community so we can hear from you. So welcome to the Champions Table. And before we get there, we're going to talk to a gentleman by the name of Greg Burkett. All right, Mr. Greg Burkett. Let me tell you about him. Greg Burkett is a published author, running relationships, Sankofa Black Reading Collection, co-author of the Black History, Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas, Emma Montgomery Publications, the Great Black North Poetry Anthology, Frontenac House Poetry, and the Recognized Educator. He is a Governor General Award for Teaching Excellence finalist of 2011 and AHEN Excellence in Teaching Award winner 2016. He has written curriculum for the Ontario Ministry of Education and has served as a curriculum consultant and has the Ontario Black History Society in the past. Greg has written freelance for the Toronto Star and was also a senior writer for the CBC Kids website. He has appeared on City TV News, Breakfast Television, Global News, CTV, to discuss issues pertaining to anti-Black racism and its impact on education system and strategies to address these ongoing challenges. Greg is a poet and a playwright. Two plays that Greg wrote are Do You Remember Me, which I happen to be blessed to be a part of, and Pieces of the Black Woman's Soul were performed at the Toronto Fringe Festival, and the Sandbox Theater in downtown Toronto, respectfully. Greg is also a co-developer and co-presenter of See Us, Learn Us, Teaching the Black Canadian Experience, a nationwide webinar for educators and education stakeholders in partnership with Nelson Education. He continues to create material and resources for the Nelson Digital Learning Ecosystem, Edwin. So he comes well-resourced, well-educated, well-researched. And as we say on our show, men talk, women talk, but the truth can't lie and the truth will set you free. Please join me in welcoming a fellow believer, poet, writer, and friend, and my brother, Greg Burkett. Welcome to the Love Bay family and the Champions Table, man. How you doing, brother?
I'm maintaining. Thank you so much for having me. Nigel, our friendship through the years has just been a blessing. So I'm just really happy to be here to chop it up with you tonight, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. I'm happy to have you here, man. Looking forward to, having a real conversation. And let me say this to the audience who are listening, man. The number is 437-778-3299. Call in, put in your comments, put in your anything you want to do, man. Let's have this conversation together with the country and with the globe. All right. That is what we're about. All right. So listen, man, I'm giving you full permission, okay, to come with the fire. You know what I'm saying? All right. I'll give you full permission to come with the fire today,
All right.
Keep the conversation, but it's going to be a good conversation nonetheless, man.
Cool.
All right. So I'm giving you the torch. You all right? You're all right with having the torch, brother?
Yeah, man. I'm good. I'm ready.
Yeah. We're not burning it down. We're burning it up. You know what I'm saying? Burning it up.
Okay. All right. Thanks for straightening that out, man.
We're not burning the country down. We're burning it up. Is it?
Okay.
For the good. All right, awesome, man. So let's get into the first conversation, man. So what is the earliest recorded mention of people of African descent in Canada? So what
All
is the
right. So,
earliest recorded mention of people of
hmm,
African descent in Canada, man?
yeah, so that's that's an interesting question, because when you ask that question, we definitely have to go with, or I'm going to go with rather, the first recorded. And when I say first recorded, I'm talking about the way that we view history now, conventionally, right? So written. However, that does not mean that Black people did not come to the geopolitical region that we now know as North America or Canada before this individual that I'm going to speak about. But the first recorded Black man that we know of, through I guess, the way history is recorded now, would be a gentleman named Matthew DaCosta. And this brother was born, we believe, in the Azores Islands. And he then would have been an interpreter, or would have worked on the west coast of Africa, with tradespeople. And that's where he would have picked up these different languages. He's well known for his multilingual dexterity, right? So he spoke several languages: Dutch, French, Portuguese, and then, of course, he also spoke what they call a pidgin language. So it's a language that's sort of a mashup of different trading languages, European languages, and also including then some of the languages of the indigenous people of North America. So he was able to communicate with traders first and foremost, and this was something that was well documented. A lot of individuals from the west coast of Africa were used to translate between the indigenous African languages and the European traders. And again, they had this, what you call almost like an emergency language, so a language that's made up, pidgin language of different languages, and comes together to be a language unto itself, right? So Matthew DaCosta was able to communicate in a lot of different languages, and then it's believed that he came to what is now, I guess, would be modern day Nova Scotia. He came with the explorers, right? European explorers, right?
Right.
European traders and explorers, particularly Dutch and French, and one name that a lot of us would know who were schooled in, or educated rather, in the Canadian system, Samuel de Champlain. Right, it's believed that he came on one of his expeditions at least, and he worked as an interpreter rather, because he was actually able to communicate with the Micmac and the Europeans. He also had what would be considered a wealthy contract back then. So he did not come as an enslaved person. So the first Black man to come to Canada was not enslaved. He was working as an interpreter, and he had what they call what would have been considered back then a wealthy contract, a 3-year contract that he signed with the Dutch. It's believed he has a very interesting history, and a history that's kind of hard to piece together, but it's believed that he worked for the French first and then was kidnapped by the Dutch, because he was so good at what he did.
He was that
right?
Good.
Yeah, exactly. They wanted him, right? And then they signed him to a contract. And it was a lucrative contract, apparently. So he came here, and he was a very well-respected individual on those expeditions.
Wow. And where did you say he was from? What is those islands called?
Azores Islands. So it's close to Portugal and northern Africa.
Okay.
So it's believed that that's where he's born, but he's an African man.
Yeah. That's awesome, bro. That's awesome. That's good history, man. So the first man here was actually a free man. He was a free man.
Yes.
I think that's important to put out there. He was a free man. Okay. That's 100%. Awesome, man. That's awesome. So in this conversation, I shared this with you before, is I wanted to talk about the Silk Road, but we don't really need to get into that. I just wanted to talk about how were people of African descent traveling the world before this time, because I think there is the notion that we've only come in the 70s, or we've only been traveling to different parts of the world. But we had people who were explorers as well, correct? That were
100%.
traveling the world for thousands and thousands of years, trading and trading with other countries and other continents and other places and other cultures. So can you share a little bit about that?
So there's a Jamaican poet. His name is Muta Baruka. I don't know if you've ever heard of Muta Baruka before, but he's a dread. Or he has locks, Rasta, and he said something that has always stuck with me. He said that Black history is not slavery. Black history was interrupted by slavery, right? So Black history is not slavery. Slavery interrupted Black history. So our understanding of Black people traveling and being in different parts of the world, and the so-called African diaspora, is usually connected to enslavement, right? And that's how we were, it's believed that that's how we were moved around the world. But we have to go before that. We have to look at history before that, because again, it's enslavement interrupted our history, right? So if we want to go back, as far back as we can, and this is a lot of people. When you bring up the Bible, for instance, a lot of people will say, well, that's a collection of stories or whatever the case might be. But historians themselves will actually look at the Bible and say that the Bible is a valid document to study history, not necessarily from, a moral or a spiritual standpoint. They're just talking about it as a history book. A lot of them will go back and say that the Bible checks out with regard to history. So when you look at the Bible, for instance, the very first nation that's mentioned in the Bible is actually Ethiopia, right? The very first nation in history that's mentioned in this book that is, respected by historians for its historical truth. The very first nation is an African nation that's mentioned. Actually, there are two regions that are mentioned. So Havilah, which is also located in Africa, and then Ethiopia itself is mentioned when they're talking about the rivers that surround the Garden of Eden. The individuals that are talked about in the earliest part of the Bible, we're talking about the Jobs and even Abraham and individuals like that, Nimrod. All of these individuals are known as Afro-Asiatics, meaning that they come from a region. The oldest regions that are talked about that are known are the Africa, what are now the geopolitical regions that are known as Africa and Asia. So the very first individuals that we talk about, or that we know and that are mentioned in these ancient scriptures, are Afro-Asiatics. So they are individuals from that region who more than likely would look like you and I, right? So when we talk about Black people being in different parts of the world and those kinds of things, we have to go right back to the beginning. And if we go back to the beginning and we look at the history of nations, Black people are there. So Black people were everywhere, to start out what we now know as the history of the world, or what many historians would concur is the history of the world. So it predates the Silk Road. It predates travel and exploration and trade. Black people really, as we describe them now, again, we have to talk about race and understand that time and place dictate how we see race and how we view race. But nonetheless, individuals who would look like you and myself, when we go back as far as we can, those individuals were everywhere.
Man, that is a gem. So you're saying that human history is Black history, and also that biblical history is Black history as well.
Yes, sir. So when we think about so in the Bible, there is a story of a character named Noah, right? And Noah is most famous for the ark, and it's believed that human history, really, the nations, they stem from Noah's progeny. So Noah has three sons, Japheth, Shem, and Ham, right? And it's believed that when we look at the regions where Japheth's people settled, that's modern day Europe. When we look at Shem's people, that would be what we now would call, I guess, the Middle East, Asia. And then when we look at Ham's people, that would be Africa. So Ham had 4 sons, and his 4 sons were Put, Mizraim, Canaan, and Cush. And Put is the father of modern day Libya. Mizraim is Egypt. Cush would be Ethiopia, which back then, so with the Bible, sometimes the Bible would refer to Egypt and Ethiopia to talk about large parts of Africa. So Cush also would encompass like modern day Sudan. And then you have Canaan, and Canaan is now the region that is being hotly contested, which is Israel, Palestine, right? Right. If we're talking about individuals who, and it's believed that Ham is the progeny of Africa, is the progenitor, or the ancestor rather, and Africa is the progeny of Ham. So if we're looking at individuals again who look like you and I, we supposedly trace our history back to Ham. Ham's, as I said, Ham had 4 sons, and Canaan now, Canaan, the land of Canaan, we know for one that Judah, who is a son of Jacob, who comes from the Shemites, Shem, right? Yeah. We know that Judah slept with a Canaanite woman, Tamar, and had a child with her. And then we also know that Rahab, who was a Canaanite woman, married into Israel as well, or into the Israelites or the children of Israel as well, right? So there was a lot of mixing that was going on, particularly between Shem and Canaan. So we're talking about a lot of mixing between these Afro-Asiatics to form the world back then. And these are the people who it's believed Jesus would have come through, right? Mm-hmm. Through the line of Judah. And Judah had this child with Tamar, and Tamar was a Canaanite woman, right? And then we talk about Rahab, and she's a Canaanite woman, and Canaan is the son of Ham, and Ham is supposed to be the father of Africa. So we're talking about Black people. A lot of times when we think about Black people in the Bible, we go to the Queen of Sheba, or we talk about the Ethiopian eunuch, and that's about it. It's far more vast than that. I would even go as far as to say that you may not even encounter white people until the New Testament.
Wow. Okay. I've always, the thing that has always been the thing that has always hit me is when I, read about the story of Jesus, and when he had to flee Herod when he was born. It said he fled to Egypt. You know what I'm saying? And there was a meme that I used to see, and it was like, this white baby hiding in Egypt. I'm like, how is a baby? that would not be the place you would hide if that was the case, right?
Because you're gonna stand out
without saying it. Without saying it, if you're hiding in Egypt, then you must resemble these people, right? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So
that's exactly.
That's powerful. That's powerful. Mm-hmm. Okay, man. Love Bay Radio family, I hope you're taking this in, man. These are some real gems. If you want to share in this conversation, I've shared the number already. Please join in. If you have questions to ask, please join in. We want to have this conversation with you. Yeah. So, all right. That was great. Let's continue, man. So let's fast forward now back to, we're back in Canada now. Let's talk about Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's talk about Canada again. Can we talk about who were the people of African descent that originally settled in Canada? Where did they come from?
Okay, so we talked already about Matthew DaCosta, but Matthew DaCosta came and left. He didn't stay. So the first individual that we know of that came to Canada and stayed after Matthew DaCosta would have been around 1628-ish, and it would have been a young boy between the age of 6 to 9 years old, and he was from Madagascar, and he came. He was purchased. He was enslaved in what was called then New France, right? And he was given the name Olivier Lejeune. We'll never know what his real name or the name that his parents gave him. But the name that he was given was Olivier Lejeune. And that name is a mix of two names. He was purchased. I think he was eventually purchased by a clerk in the colony of New France, and that individual's name was Olivier Tardif or Tardif. And then he was baptized by I believe is a Jesuit priest, and his name was Father Lejeune. So they took Olivier from the individual who purchased him, and Lejeune from the individual who baptized him, and then they named him Olivier Lejeune. So again, young boy, dig at the empathy, right? 6 to 9 years old, taken away from your family and brought here to New France to work as an enslaved person. So that set off enslavement in Canada. We had enslavement in New France and Ile Royale, which would be now Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, right? There are all kinds of records of enslavement in those regions to start out with. With New France, it was, there were a few reasons why, they had or why they started enslavement. They were given permission by the King of France to have enslavement, or it was legalized rather by the King of France in New France. And France at that time had a lot of different colonies. So they had colonies in the Caribbean, so like Guadeloupe and Martinique and Haiti and of course then New France here in what we now know as Canada. So the settlers or the colonizers who were in New France, they wanted to be like their counterparts in the islands, right? In Martinique and Guadeloupe. Remember, enslavement in the islands was a huge part of their economy. So enslavement in the islands, the colonies there would have been known as slave societies because slavery pretty much drove their economy. But in Canada was a society with slaves. So the difference is our economy was not driven, or the New France economy was not driven by enslaved people, but the colonizers here wanted to be like their counterparts in Martinique and Guadeloupe and Haiti and places like that. So they had enslaved people, not just Black, but Indigenous as well. They called them Pawnee. So they had Pawnee and African enslaved people here in New France. And it was a sign of wealth if you could own enslaved people. It showed that you were wealthy. They also helped with the fur trade, and they gave them crazy jobs. I mean, there is documentation rather of enslaved Africans working as rat catchers, so catching rats, right, in the colony. And enslavement here in Canada, it was challenging. There are records of sexual assault. There are records of floggings and violent beatings as well. And in some ways, it was. You could almost argue that it was just as challenging as plantation enslavement, because there were fewer slaves here or enslaved people here. So that meant that all of the attention could be on them. So it was more difficult for you to escape. It was more difficult for you to plan rebellions, those kinds of things, because you were being, you were being heavily surveilled by the slaveholders, right? So enslavement here was challenging. It was difficult. Don't ever let anyone tell you that enslavement in Canada was softer or it was a different brand of enslavement. Enslavement is enslavement, and anytime you have people oppressed and you take away their rights and you take away their name and their, you're trying to take away their humanity, essentially, it's not a good thing. So there was no, enslavement here was more lenient or nicer than enslavement in other parts of the world. It was just as challenging here in Canada.
Right. And I see that you're realizing that it was for the goal, it was economic reasons why slavery existed. It was just economic reasons, as opposed to paying somebody to do something. You're getting it
It
done for
was
free, but you're getting at, yeah.
it was economic here in Canada, but in New France, but it was also a sign of wealth. It was a sign of status, right, as
Okay.
well. Because again, they didn't have the huge plantations. Enslavement didn't drive our economy rather, or economy in the colonies the way it did in, say, for instance, the southern United States or in the Caribbean, right? Those were economies that were driven by slave labor. But here in Canada, not so much. There weren't as many enslaved people here, and the climate here, when you couldn't have the crops that you would have on a plantation that would need huge numbers of it, or that would you'd want this huge labor force to work for you, right? So enslavement here was a little bit different, but it was still harsh. It was still, as a matter of fact, we like to talk about the Underground Railroad. But at one point in time, the Underground Railroad actually worked in reverse, meaning that in Vermont actually became the first free colony in what we now know as North America. So you had Black people running and leaving, trying to escape enslavement in New France, which is now Quebec, and going south to Vermont to escape. Right? We don't like to talk about that because we usually like to talk about it going the other way because it makes us look good, right? But at one point in time, there were Black people, actually enslaved Black people, leaving the so-called colonies here to find freedom in Vermont. So
wow.
To answer your question, the enslaved population was the next group that came after Matthew DaCosta. After them, then you have the Loyalists, right, who came from the United States. They were offered freedom and land if they fought on the side of the British during the War of Independence, and they had to escape. Many of them had to escape their plantations to go to the front lines and fight with the British against the Americans, and the British lost the war. So then they had to relocate these individuals that they had promised freedom and land. So then they brought them or sent many of them to parts of Southern Ontario, but for the most part to Nova Scotia, right? So many of them were in Nova Scotia, and you had the Loyalist population there. They were promised land and jobs, and that didn't materialize. So many of them actually complained to the British government, and some of them were then sent to Sierra Leone, to a colony that the British started there in Sierra Leone. So that was the Loyalist population. After the Loyalist population, then you have the Jamaican Maroons, particularly from Trelawney, right? And they came, the Maroons, and I see Nigel is just glowing with pride there because he's a true Jamaican. So whenever you talk about the Maroons, So they as many of you might know, Jamaica switched hands. At one point in time, Jamaica was a Spanish colony, and the British defeated the Spanish. And evidence of that would be Spanish Town, right, in Jamaica, right? So you had the Maroons who had escaped enslavement while the Spanish were the holders of the colony, and they were in the mountains, right? Jamaica has the very mountainous terrain, and they were in the mountains, and then the British came and they wanted to re-enslave them, and of course the Maroons weren't having that. So they fought them for about 100 years. Were able to fight off
100 years.
Yes.
Wow. That is some resiliency right there, boy. They're like not having it. Okay.
No. And it was all guerrilla warfare. They're in the trees, and the British had a whale of a time trying to re-enslave the Maroons. So then the British were able to, after 100 years, subdue them. And they did what they do best. They broke out the treaties and said, okay, if you sign this, right, if you help us re-enslave any other runaways and things of that nature, we'll leave you alone and you'll be free. And supposedly they were not supposed to ever deport the Maroons. but there was a secret clause in the treaty. And shortly after the treaty was signed, they deported, I believe it was about 500 Maroons, 550, I think, to Nova Scotia. So they deported them to Nova Scotia, and they, like they did with the Loyalists, they promised them housing and land. And it actually worked out a little bit better. They did give them, they did provide them with housing. They provided them with jobs as well. And if you ever go to Nova Scotia and you see the Citadel in Halifax, downtown Halifax, and I've seen it actually, the Maroons helped to build that. That's yeah, man. So
I just got to ask you something. So we got some conversation coming in, Greg. We got some conversation coming in. All right. So there is a comment from, I believe it's Phoebe, said, "Great history about us in Canada." She's from Toronto. And then we have Mr. Jay Johnson from Halifax, Canada. And he's asking the question, why is there no Matthew DaCosta holiday in Canada? That's a great question.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, great question.
So, yeah, I mean, so hard to answer because I'm not in charge, and I can't, if I was in charge, we'd have at least a week off to celebrate.
A week off for Matthew DaCosta, yeah.
Right.
So it's something we should be pushing. It's something we should be pushing, then, is what you're saying.
We should, man, 100%. Yeah. My understanding is, for one, there are actually disputes as to how long Matthew DaCosta was here. So and there are some people, again, that actually even dispute whether he even came. But we do know that there are some. I believe there's documentation of him coming with a Dutch explorer for sure, and we believe that he came with Champlain as well. But we don't know how long he actually stayed. There are monuments to him. There is actually a school named after him. There is a postage stamp featuring him as well. And we do know that is it in Annapolis Royal in Nova Scotia? But there is a monument to him in Nova Scotia as well. But as far as why there's no holiday for him, I mean, we can guess and say that the understanding of how important he is to Canadian history and our place in Canadian history, that's to some degree a new phenomenon, right? You and I, Nigel, were educated here in Toronto all our lives. And I don't know if I can speak for you, but I'll speak for myself. I didn't learn about Matthew DaCosta in school.
Nope. I learned about him when I was teaching it.
Right, exactly. When you're interested in it, right? And then when I went to York University and took some courses there, so self-interest and post-secondary, I was able to find out more about Black Canadian history. But going through the system here, right? There's a professor and a poet. Her name is Afua Cooper, and she actually says, yeah, you probably would have. She's very well respected as a professor, historian, and a poet. And she said it's possible for an individual to go through their entire academic career and get a degree in Canadian studies and not know that there was enslavement here in Canada for 200 years.
200 years?
It lasted 200 years, sir.
Wow.
Right? Let alone the fact that we don't talk about that, segregation that followed enslavement here in Canada as well. Right? We always think of those things as an American phenomenon. That's something that happened south of the border, but that wasn't a problem here. But we had segregation here. Even cemeteries in Canada were segregated. Right. Wow. So, what does that say to you?
You die, you couldn't be beside him. Mercy.
Right. Exactly. Wow. Right.
Wow.
So, with regard to a holiday for Matthew DaCosta, I think part of it is because it's just, we haven't we haven't been educated thoroughly in Black Canadian history and the contributions and the longevity of Black people in Canada. So, this is why we don't, a lot of us don't even know about him, much less to have a holiday for him.
Wow. Yeah, man. You got another message from our Jim Dolan in BC, says he's enjoying the show. All right. That's awesome. That's awesome. Keep dialing in, guys. Keep calling in the questions. Number is 778-3299. We definitely would like to hear more from you, man. You're dropping some real gems, man. We like this. We like this, man. So we're gonna continue. We're gonna continue, man. So let's dispel a little myth, and you've already done it, really and truly. Is Trudeau revolutionized immigration laws in Canada, providing opportunities for more people from the Caribbean to immigrate to Canada. Can you just touch on that a little bit for us? I mean, that's where a lot of Canadians believe that, you know, that's where most Black folks or people of African descent or Caribbean descent came to Canada in the 1970s. But obviously, you've shown us that we were here way, way, way before that. Yeah.
Right. So the Maroons, we talked about the Maroons. They were here. You know, that's the first sizable group of individuals coming from the Caribbean to Canada. And that's, we're talking about the late 1700s with the Maroons, right? So black people have been in Canada. And when we're talking about Matthew DaCosta, we're going back to early 1600s. And then, as I mentioned, Olivier Lejeune was here around, I believe, 1628, and enslavement thereafter for the next 200 years up until about 1834, right? So, yeah, or 1833, actually, I think. So Black people have been here for a long time. And as I said, you know, different waves of immigration. So you had the Loyalists, and then you had the Maroons. You had individuals who came through the Underground Railroad, right? At least it's estimated around at least 50,000 came to different parts of what we now know as Canada through the Underground Railroad. We also have individuals who came during the War of 1812 and were in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. We also have individuals who came in the late 1800s who actually were from California, and they ended up going to Vancouver Island and Salt Spring Island. They were sent for they were actually given an invitation by the governor of Vancouver Island and Salt Spring Island. His last name was Douglas, Governor Douglas, and he actually was trying to build those colonies, and he reached out to Black people who were in California on the West Coast. Black people were free in California, but they were treated terribly. They actually had to pay to live in the state, and then they had to wear a badge that showed that they had paid this fee to live in the state of California. Yeah, this is prior to emancipation, so this is like late 1850s, I believe. So the governor of Salt Spring Island and Vancouver Island actually put out an invitation to Black people and invited them to come up to the colonies, offered them cheap land and opportunities. Really what he was looking for also was for them to help build the colony and to defend the colony from American invasions and annexation, right? So he sent out this invitation, and many of them took him up on it, and they came to live in Vancouver on Salt Spring Island and Vancouver Island. And you have some legendary Black people coming out of that population there. Sylvia Stark is one of them. Another one would be a guy named Mifflin Gibb. And I know you want us to talk later on about some of the contributions of Black people. But right now, you know, this fits in with what we're talking about right now. Mifflin Gibb actually came to live in Vancouver Island. He was a successful businessman, and he was a delegate to the convention that led to British Columbia actually joining Confederation and becoming a part of Canada. So if it wasn't for this Black man, it might be said that British Columbia might not be a part of Canada, because he was very much involved. He was a well-respected politician and businessman, and he was very much involved in BC becoming a part of Canada, right? So there's so many waves of Black people coming at different times. We talked about the fact that many of them came through the Underground Railroad, at least 50,000, and then we get to 1921. So the Underground Railroad roughly takes place between 1830s to about 1864, 1865. You have the emancipation proclamation in the United States. So you had about 50,000 Black people coming during that time. And then we get to 1921 and there's only 18,000 Black people in all of Canada. And you're saying, you know, what happened? How did we go from 50,000 all the way down? Well, what happened was a lot of them actually left and went back to the United States for a couple of reasons. One, to look for family, right? Because they escaped and they left. Some of them left family and they want to go back now that you know, their family is free and they you know, they could go back and reunite. So a lot of them left for that reason. But a lot of them also left because even though Canada gave them freedom, Canada didn't necessarily roll out the welcome map, meaning that it wasn't necessarily the most friendly environment. As a matter of fact, there was a lot of hostility towards Black people in Canada. And it was expressed by political leaders, by, you know, just by the general population themselves as well. The immigration officers as well. They, you know, they, at one point, one immigration officer said, African people from any part of the world are not part of an invited race to Canada, right? So they didn't want people coming at all, right? And they made that very much known. You know, at one point, Black people weren't allowed to live in certain urban areas, right? St. John in New Brunswick, Black people were not allowed to live in the city unless they had a job there. You know, also I think there was a ban at one point in time in Winnipeg, Black people were not allowed to come into the city. And, you know, so it was very well known that Black people were not necessarily wanted here. So a lot of them came during the through the Underground Railroad during that time, but a lot of them actually went back as well afterward. So the population went way down. Now, you're asking about.
You got a couple of messages too, man.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Here's some folks asking. They're going, why isn't this history not being taught in schools as if we were never here historically? Very good question for sure. And then there's another person from St. John's, Christy, is saying this history has to be taught. What can we do about it? That's real. Yeah. What can we do about it? Yeah.
So the first question, you know, why is this history not being taught in schools? So, you know, both you and I, born in Canada, right? Born Canadians of Caribbean parentage. And we both said that we went through this system and we didn't get this, right? So Robin Maynard, she has a book called Policing Black Lives. I would recommend this book highly. Policing Black Lives by Robin Maynard.
Black Lives. Okay.
Yeah. And she says, she said something that really stood out to me. She said, between 1967 to 1971, Canada gets a new national anthem, Canada gets a new flag, and Canada adopts multiculturalism as a policy. So during this time, between 67 to 71, 1967 to 1971, Canada is branding itself, right? And it's really what it's trying to do is make itself the opposite of the United States, right? We're not them. We are this multicultural, inviting, nation where culture is celebrated, and you come here and you can retain your culture. So as they're
100 plus years later, it sounds like this theme is continuing, isn't it?
Right. So. And it's funny, right? Because again, you don't think of nations branding themselves. You think of companies, or you think of people branding themselves. But Canada's branding itself during this time, and the things that don't fit the brand all of a sudden start to be pushed to the side and don't necessarily make it into the narrative of Canada, right? The narrative that's pushed, the narrative that we embrace and that we love and that we understand. It's, it was a haven of freedom for Black people. Like they came through the Underground Railroad here to find freedom. Thanksgiving and, all those things that we celebrate as part of the national narrative. You can't talk about enslavement because it doesn't match the brand, right? You can't talk about segregation. It doesn't match the brand. You can't talk about residential schools and, and stolen land. because it doesn't match the brand. You can't talk about Chinese labor exploitation. Can't talk about Japanese internment. You can't talk about the Komagata Maru and the way that people from South Asia were treated, because none of these things match the brand. So that's why they start to disappear, and they're not spoken about as much or at all when we're being taught history. So that's why we weren't taught, these things. That answers that question.
Yeah. That's a powerful statement that you made, though, right? In the sense of, is history if you erase certain parts of history and only teach a certain portion of history? Is that truly history? You know what I'm saying? Is that truly history? I don't think that is truly history at all. You know what I mean?
No, it's revisionist history, right? And it's an agenda serving history. It becomes very political.
Yeah. Most definitely, man. I'm glad you're dropping some good stuff, man. Come on, dial in, folks. Dial in. This is some good gems, man. We're gonna keep it moving, though. I'm gonna jump to this question, and I'll probably come back to the other one after. But let's talk about our contributions, man. Let's talk about how have we contributed via inventions, via I've heard of the Elijah McCoys. I've heard of the revolutionary business people like Marianne Shadd. Yeah, tell us about these folks, man, that were here, people of African descent that actually contributed to Canada in major ways. Yeah,
right. So I mentioned one of them already, Mifflin Gibb. We talked about him, and the fact that we were talking about Confederation and the unification of the nation. This Black man played a huge role. We can talk about William Peyton Hubbard, who was really a Renaissance man. He was an inventor, and he was also a politician. As a matter of fact, he's from Toronto. Black man, a Black family that goes way back in Toronto. William Peyton Hubbard's family. At one point in time, he was an alderman, but he was also the deputy mayor of Toronto. Black man. Yeah. We're talking late 1800s. And he would have actually at times, when the mayor was away on business, he took over the mayoral responsibilities and was the mayor in Toronto. So that's William Peyton Hubbard. There's that show on CBC, what's it called? Murdoch Mysteries. I don't know if you've ever heard of Murdoch Mysteries, but they actually had an episode where William Peyton Hubbard was actually featured in the episode. So you have him, you have, and this, when we talk about the contributions of Black people in Canada, we have to talk about the historic Black Canadian communities. My sister Colleen and myself, right? Yeah, my sister Colleen and myself, we have a company called Burkitt Educational Consultants, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but we like to call these HBCCs, historically Black Canadian communities, right? So you got the HBCUs in the States. There you go. Because you went to one, right? Yeah, so we have our HBCCs here in Canada, and some amazing people came out of those historically Black Canadian communities. So if we talk about, for instance, Little Burgundy in Montreal, right? And that was a community that was made up of the formerly enslaved, the descendants of the formerly enslaved, as well as men coming from the United States to work on the railroads as sleeping car porters. They brought their families here as well to Little Burgundy, and then people coming from the Caribbean for education. And they formed this amazing community called Little Burgundy in Montreal. And this community, the Marcus Garvey, UNIA, had a chapter in this community. And then this community had a church, the United, oh my goodness, what is it called? I'm forgetting the name, but nonetheless, it was one of the bigger Black churches in Canada, in this community. And that church actually fought to desegregate the armed forces in Canada. So that church actually led to Black people being able to enlist to help defend this country in World War II. This community had a community center, and that center was supplying or providing rather tutoring and lunches and all kinds of things for young Black people at the time. But you also had a thriving jazz scene coming out of this community, and out of that thriving jazz scene, because you had they actually called it Harlem North because
Wow.
because jazz was so amazing in this community, and jazz musicians were coming here to perform with the jazz musicians here in Canada, in Montreal. And then you have Oscar Peterson coming out of that community. And at one point in time, arguably, Oscar Peterson was the best jazz pianist in the world, right?
Yeah.
You have Oscar Peterson, Oliver Jones, Joe Seeley, all of these amazing musicians coming out of Little Burgundy and contributing to Canada's to Canadian culture, right? And then you also have, coming out of Little Burgundy, out of that community, you also have the first Black Governor General, Michael Jean, coming out of that community as well, right? So when you're talking about contributions, you have to talk about the HBCCs, right? You know, you talk about the Hogan's Alley in Vancouver. And one of the things, unfortunately, that a lot of these communities have in common is gentrification. So a lot of them are no longer around under the guise of urban renewal, right? And people are pushed out, just like what we're seeing happening here in Toronto with Little Jamaica, right? But Hogan's Alley was a thriving Black community in Vancouver that also had an amazing jazz scene. And one of the amazing individuals who was a civil rights fighter as well, and one of the founders of the Fountain Episcopal Church in Hogan's Alley. Her name was Nora Hendricks, and that last name Hendricks might sound familiar to you because she was the grandmother of Jimi Hendrix. And Jimi Hendrix spent a lot of his summers at Nora Hendrix's house and here in Vancouver, in Canada, right? So you know, it's arguable that the influence of the musicians there may have influenced Jimi Hendrix, but a lot of jazz musicians would go to Hogan's Alley to hang out and to perform there as well. So when we're talking about the contribution, there's so many people, man. Donald Moore. So you're talking about the fact that Pierre Trudeau and the Liberals in 1967 in particular brought in the point system, which sort of pushed aside some of the racist leanings of Canadian immigration law, and allowed individuals to come to Canada, to immigrate to Canada based on what they were going to be able to, you know, what they were going to be able to contribute, their skills, right? So the point system really was looking at their skills, the skill set that they had, and that allowed a lot of people from the Caribbean and from Africa to start coming to Canada. But before that happened, you had an individual named Donald Moore. He was from Barbados, and he actually fought for the immigration laws to be more fair and to allow Black people to come to Canada. And that's what opened up the West Indian Domestic Labor Scheme. And that was allowing Black women to come to Canada between 1955 and 1965. And they came over as domestics, but then they could actually apply for citizenship and stay on. Of course, many of them.
That's how my mom came. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, are you serious?
Yeah.
Wow. Phenomenal. That's amazing.
Looking at people's houses and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yes. Right. Okay. That's amazing, man. So that's our history right there. And Jean Augustine, who we all know as a strong political figure in Canada, she came through the West Indian Domestic Labor Scheme and went on to have an amazing career in education and then in politics, right? So, you know, when we're talking about these Black people who have contributed to Canadian society, we got to talk about the Black communities. We have to talk about the Black authors, Austin Clarke, at one point in time. And Austin Clarke is originally from Barbados, came to Canada, I believe, in the 60s. And at one point in time, his book, The Polished Hoe, was you know, a bestseller.
He was a playwright as well, right? It was a playwright as well.
Playwright also, yep. And known internationally, respected internationally as an author. And that was the I guess probably one of the most well-respected and well-known works coming out of Canada, novels coming out of Canada, and it was about Barbados, written by a man from Barbados, but a Canadian nonetheless, right? And then Lawrence Hill, The Book of Negroes, right? Dion Brand, all of these amazing authors that have come out of Canada and have literally put Canadian society, in written word, and have allowed us as well as the world to understand Canadian society. I would really recommend anyone that wants to know about Black history in Canada to read the Book of Negroes, because it gives an in-depth look at the Black loyalists and their their experience in Nova Scotia as well. So there's so many. You
dropping some real good gems, man. But I wanna you're talking about, you segued into things they should read. Tell us about what you are a part of and what you're doing to ensure that this history is being shared and is being is available to the public. Can we get into that?
Cool. So I mentioned it before. My sister and myself, we have an educational consulting company called Burkitt Educational Consultants. You can check out our website, BIRKETT education.com. That's BIRKETT education.com. And if you go to burkitteducation.com, the website, you'll see all of the resources that we're preparing and that we have prepared, rather. We've done a lot of work with Nelson Education. So we've done a lot of resource building with them. And also we've contributed to a textbook, a Black history textbook. The textbook is called Black History, Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas. So again, the textbook is called Black History, Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas. And it's a textbook that is being used throughout the GTA. It's also being used in Nova Scotia. It's also used in Bermuda. So we've contributed to that. We've also done some writing with and for the Sankofa reading series. And it's actually, those are children's books. So from kindergarten to grade 3. And these books are.
Do you have any with you that you can kind of show so folks can see what they kind of look like? Yeah. That'd be great. Yeah, that's the Sankofa series right there. Running relationships. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the one I wrote. My sister wrote one as well. And the textbook, I guess I can show that also. I'm not sure if you're able to see it.
Yeah, we are. That's amazing.
Awesome. Yeah. Right. So yeah, those are some of our contributions. We, as I mentioned, we do a lot of work with Nelson Education. We also do a lot of workshops where we go into schools and we work with teachers. We support teachers in showing them how to infuse the Black Canadian experience into their teaching pedagogy from kindergarten all the way through to grade 12 in every discipline. So not just in social studies, but across disciplines, in everything from French to physical education to drama, everything, right? Because again, we believe that it's got to be an experience that kids are learning right as they enter and continues all the way through. Because what happens often is we leave it until either February to talk about these kinds of things, and we're ticking boxes at that point, and it's not the most authentic. And then sometimes we leave it to high school, and there's certain courses in high school that they can take in grade 11 and grade 12. But by then, many of them have checked out, or they don't think that our history is something that's important because they haven't learned about it up until that point. So why would I take that course? Why would I, so it's really preaching to the choir.
Real buy-in. Yeah.
Right. So that's what we're doing to do our best to infuse the Black Canadian experience from kindergarten all the way through to grade 12.
All right. So how do people find you guys? Because look at Love Bay Radio, Love Bay family. You've seen some of the things he's shared. Greg has shared just here within our episode. So you can definitely get in contact with this gentleman and his sister and have them come to your community, come to your space so that they can share some more of this rich history. So tell us, man, how can people find you, man?
All
Yeah.
right. So again, I'm not sure if I put it into the chat if it will show up.
Yeah.
But yeah, will it? If I put or I can just say it. I can just say it out loud.
Yeah.
So again, I'll say again, birketteducation.com. So BIRKETT education, BIRKETT education.com. That's our website. You can go there. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Greg Burkett. So that's GREG, Greg, and then Burkett, BIRKETT. So Greg Burkett on LinkedIn. You can also find me on YouTube and Instagram. It's the same handle. Greg B _ Writes. Greg B _ WRITES. So on YouTube, Greg B _ Writes, or on Instagram, Greg B _ Writes. Yeah, thank you, Nigel, for putting all of these in.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can find us on X at EduBurkett. So that's EduBirkett. So that's on X, right? So you can find us there as
Thank you.
well, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, those are all the ways that you can get in touch with us. And on the website, there's also an email, info at Burkett Education. So you can hit us up at info at Burkett Education as well. So I look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, man, that would be amazing, 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 man. And you said info at burketteducation.com, correct?
Yeah, that's the email.
The email. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yo, Greg, Mr. Burkett, man, thank you for coming through and dropping some real gems, the fire starter, we have to call you, but bringing that real history, giving that holistic sense of our history in this country, Canada, because as they say, the cultural tapestry of our country is filled with different textures and material, but as people, we all contribute rich, diverse, and powerful history of the country of Canada. And it's time for the lion to share his story, his own story, for his or her perspective, for the purpose of all of us in this country respecting and appreciating each other's God-given identity and contribution. So we thank you for sharing that and showing us here and the rest of the world that the contributions of our people matter, and they have been felt over the years. And as we say on every episode, men talk, women talk, but the truth can't lie, and the truth will set you free. Thank you for joining us, Greg. Thank you for being here, Love Bay family. And we out at the champions table. Peace. Have a great time.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.